My goodness, this is rather interesting that Sue Bird has brought this up to Kelsey Mitchell in light of some of the drama from a couple of days ago when Stephanie White was very clear and there was no confusion looking at anybody out there, including people on YouTube, that may think that was misconstrued, even though Stephanie White is the one that said these things. And I'm not going to go after specific YouTubers because that's not what I do. But the idea that people weren't going to take her words literally?
Stephanie White's words didn't just make headlines. They detonated across the basketball world like a grenade. The Indiana Fever's head coach looked straight into the cameras and said Kelsey Mitchell was the team's top priority. No hesitation, no disclaimer, just a calm, deliberate statement that sent shockwaves through the WNBA. Within hours, social media erupted. Fans accused the organization of disrespecting Caitlin Clark, the rookie phenom who single-handedly transformed the Fever from a struggling franchise into a national sensation. To outsiders, White's comment sounded like choosing loyalty over legacy. But what if that entire narrative was built on a misunderstanding? Because, as it turns out, what Stephanie White really meant, and what Kelsey Mitchell later revealed, tells a story that flips the script completely. The real tension wasn't between players. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't ego. It was something deeper, something that speaks to how media narratives can twist truth into fiction. And when Kelsey Mitchell finally broke her silence on Sue Bird's podcast, she didn't confirm the feud, she exposed it for what it was. A myth that the public was never supposed to believe in the first place.
It's the building around Kelsey Mitchell that I took issue with, because you got a generational Jordan-like talent on this team in Caitlin Clark. The Bulls did not choose to build around Scottie Pippen. All right? Look, the Blazers weren't building around Terry Porter. They were building around Clyde Drexler. I mean, the Knicks weren't building around Anthony Mason or John Starks or Derek Harper. They were building around Patrick Ewing. We could go on and...
The internet didn't just react, it exploded. Within hours of Stephanie White's building around Kelsey Mitchell comment, timelines were on fire. Reddit threads swarmed with theories, YouTube videos popped up dissecting every word, and Twitter, or X as it's now called, turned into a digital battlefield. Fans weren't just angry, they were outraged. Clips of White's quote were looped endlessly, each one captioned with disbelief. Did she really just say that? So Caitlin Clark isn't the future? This is insanity. It wasn't just a few loud voices, it was the entire basketball community watching a franchise seemingly trip over its own golden ticket. Caitlin Clark had done something no one thought possible. She'd turned the Indiana Fever, once an afterthought, into must-watch basketball. Ticket sales skyrocketed, road games sold out. The Fever were suddenly front-page news in mainstream outlets. She was, without question, the most influential player to ever step into the WNBA as a rookie. And yet here was the head coach, implying the team was prioritizing someone else. To fans, it felt like a slap in the face. The comparisons came fast and brutal, like the Bulls saying they're building around Horace Grant instead of Michael Jordan, like the Cavaliers telling LeBron he's just part of the system. It's madness. Every sports talk show weighed in. Some defended White's loyalty to her veteran guard, but most questioned the Fever's leadership. Why risk alienating your generational superstar? Why feed a narrative that never needed to exist? And that's when things really started spiraling. Fans began combing through old interviews, looking for signs of tension between Kelsey Mitchell and Caitlin Clark. Were there cold handshakes, fewer high fives, missed eye contact on the court? Social media became a detective's lab, but people weren't looking for truth. They were looking for evidence of drama. The irony? On the court, the chemistry was there. The two played with rhythm, energy, and trust. But no one wanted to see that. The narrative had already been written. 2 stars, 1 spotlight, and a franchise in denial. The backlash wasn't just digital. Fans who had packed arenas in Clark jerseys started questioning whether they were supporting an organization that didn't value what she represented. For many, it felt personal, like watching someone mishandle a miracle. Meanwhile, Kelsey Mitchell, the supposed villain of this storyline, stayed silent. No posts, no statements, no interviews. Just basketball. But silence in today's world only fuels speculation. And by the time she finally decided to speak, the internet had already built an entire soap opera around her. But when she finally did break her silence, everything changed. Because what Kelsey said didn't just debunk the feud, it exposed the real source of chaos, a storm created not by players, but by perception. And that revelation was about to turn the entire WNBA conversation upside down. While the internet was busy fueling rumors of tension, resentment, and locker room jealousy, the truth was quietly waiting to be heard, and it came from the one person the media had twisted into the center of the storm, Kelsey Mitchell. When she finally sat down with Sue Bird on A Touch More, fans expected fireworks. They expected denial, frustration, maybe even thinly veiled shade at Caitlin Clark. But that's not what they got. What they got was something far more powerful: clarity. Sue Bird didn't waste time. She asked the question everyone wanted answered. How does it feel to have your leadership and impact overshadowed when someone as transformative as Caitlin Clark joins the team? It was the kind of question that could have sparked defensiveness in anyone. But Mitchell didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't push blame. Instead, she leaned in with calm conviction and said what nobody expected to hear. She admitted that yes, there's been noise. Yes, social media twists everything. Yes, fans sometimes forget the players who were building long before the spotlight arrived. But she wasn't bitter about it. In fact, her tone carried more understanding than frustration. She talked about how every team, every locker room, every organization changes when someone like Caitlin Clark walks through the door. The media painted it like an ego clash, but Mitchell described it like an adjustment process. Not resentment, realignment. Her words cut through weeks of speculation like a scalpel. When something that big comes in, when someone with that much impact joins, everyone has to adjust, not because of ego, but because everything changes. The energy, the attention, the expectations. That wasn't the voice of conflict. That was leadership. And here's what nobody in the media expected. Mitchell didn't just defend her own role. She praised Clark's. She said Clark never once acted like she was bigger than the program, that she came in ready to work, to learn, to respect the veterans who had laid the groundwork. That kind of humility from a superstar, it's rare. But even rarer is the grace of a veteran willing to acknowledge it.
In one interview, Kelsey Mitchell dismantled the entire feud narrative. There was no rivalry, no silent tension, no locker room divide. The conflict everyone was so eager to see, it wasn't between players at all. It was between truth and perception, between narrative and reality. Because while the media chased clicks, the players were busy building chemistry. While fans debated leadership, the team was figuring out how to coexist under an unprecedented spotlight. The real conflict wasn't personal, it was systemic. It was about how easily a simple coaching comment and a media echo chamber could create chaos out of context. Kelsey Mitchell's words didn't just clear the air, they exposed the machinery behind the noise. The headlines weren't lies, they were distortions. And in an era where speculation spreads faster than facts, her honesty was like oxygen. What she said next, though, that final line about Caitlin Clark's humility would completely reshape the conversation. Because in just a few sentences, Mitchell proved that the story fans had been obsessed with was never about competition. It was about miscommunication. And the next revelation would make that clearer than ever. Once Kelsey Mitchell's interview started making the rounds, it became impossible to ignore just how wrong the public narrative had been. Because behind the noise, behind the headlines and viral tweets, something completely different was happening inside the Indiana Fever organization, something that never made it into the gossip cycle. While fans were arguing online about who the team should build around, the players were building together. Practices weren't icy or awkward, they were intense, competitive, and united. Mitchell and Clark weren't avoiding each other, they were feeding off each other. The cameras missed it, but those inside the locker room knew. These two were becoming the most dangerous backcourt in the WNBA. Caitlin Clark's impact was obvious from day one. Her vision, her passing, her range. She wasn't just scoring, she was orchestrating. And Kelsey Mitchell, she adapted immediately. Her scoring instincts sharpened because of Clark's presence. Defenders who used to double Mitchell suddenly had to choose, guard the deep threat or the slasher. Either way, someone got burned. Their chemistry wasn't forced, it was instinctive. When Clark drew defenders to the perimeter, Mitchell slipped into open space. When Mitchell slashed into the lane, Clark found her with pinpoint passes no one else on the roster could make. They were creating something special, the kind of offensive flow that doesn't just win games, it defines eras. And it wasn't just them. Aaliyah Boston, the quiet anchor of the Fever's front court, was thriving. Her numbers skyrocketed whenever Clark was on the floor. Suddenly, the Fever had a rhythm. Clark facilitating, Mitchell finishing, Boston dominating inside. It wasn't rivalry, it was synergy. But here's what the public didn't see. Behind the success, there was chaos, not between players, but behind closed doors in the organization itself. Management was struggling to control the narrative. Every statement, every interview, every quote was being twisted online. And instead of calming the storm, they fueled it with vague responses and tone-deaf messaging. Meanwhile, the players, the ones accused of feuding, were the only ones staying calm. They understood something the front office didn't. This wasn't a Kelsey versus Caitlyn story. It was a media versus reality story. Behind the scenes, Caitlyn leaned on Mitchell for guidance. She was the rookie phenom with the world watching, but Mitchell was the veteran who understood what it meant to grind through seasons of rebuilding, to play for pride when no one else cared. Their relationship wasn't built on competition, it was built on mutual respect. In practice, Clark would often ask questions about the Fever system, and Mitchell, known for her film room discipline, would break it down in detail. They weren't fighting for control, they were sharing it. They both wanted to win, and they both knew that to do that, they'd have to understand each other. The irony was staggering. While the media tried to sell a feud, the actual players were building one of the strongest bonds in the league. They were the calm at the center of a storm created by everyone else. And just when it seemed like things were finally starting to settle, another twist would push this story to a breaking point. Not because of anything the players did, but because of one major mistake the organization made that would fracture trust with fans across the country. Because the real fallout was still coming, and it had nothing to do with the locker room. Here's where everything flipped. The so-called relationship drama everyone was obsessed with wasn't between Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell. It was between the Indiana Fever and their fans. And once that truth came out, it changed everything.
When Caitlin Clark went down with an injury, fans didn't just feel concerned, they felt betrayed. The Fever had been riding an unprecedented wave of momentum. Sold-out arenas, record-breaking merchandise, TV ratings no one thought possible for the WNBA. Caitlin Clark wasn't just a rookie, she was a movement. She had redefined what women's basketball could be, both on and off the court. So when the injury news hit, fans waited anxiously for updates. But instead of transparency, what they got was confusion. The organization's communication was vague, inconsistent, and, according to many fans, deliberately misleading. Team statements said she was day-to-day, fueling hope that she'd return soon. Meanwhile, ticket sales kept soaring. People were spending hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to see Clark play, only to show up and learn she wasn't even suited up. Social media turned ruthless. Hashtags like #FreeCaitlin and #WhereIsClark trended. Fans who had supported the Fever through losing seasons suddenly felt like they were being used. The team's silence, once seen as professionalism, now looked like manipulation. And this, right here, is where the real relationship fracture began. Not between teammates, not between stars, but between an organization and its audience. Because for the first time in months, the story wasn't about basketball, it was about trust. The Fever had built their resurgence on authenticity, on Caitlin Clark's humility, on Kelsey Mitchell's grind, on Aaliyah Boston's quiet dominance. These women were easy to root for because they were real. But when management mishandled Clark's injury timeline, that foundation cracked. Fans felt deceived, and deception kills loyalty faster than losing ever could. And it wasn't just about missing a few games, it was about communication, or the lack of it. The organization's silence made fans question everything. Were the build around Kelsey Mitchell comments part of the same disconnect? Did management truly understand the gravity of what Clark brought to the table, not just as a player, but as a symbol of change? That's when perspective shifted. The headlines fans thought were about internal rivalry started to look like symptoms of a deeper issue, a disconnect at the top. While the players were proving every day that chemistry wasn't a problem, the front office was fumbling optics and messaging. They had 3 stars who actually liked each other, who played selflessly, who were elevating women's basketball together. And yet, the narrative that reached the public was chaos. The irony couldn't be sharper. The supposed relationship shocker wasn't a feud, it was unity. And the real dysfunction? It was upstairs, in the messaging, in the strategy, in the failure to read the moment. Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell had already figured it out. The front office hadn't. And that growing gap between the reality on the court and the perception off it was now threatening to unravel everything the Fever had built. But the story doesn't end there, because what came next would expose not just a management flaw, but a blind spot, one that could define how the entire WNBA handles its superstars moving forward. What happened inside the Indiana Fever organization wasn't a scandal born out of bad intentions, it was a masterclass in how to mishandle a golden opportunity. The deeper issue wasn't talent, effort, or even chemistry, it was vision, or rather, the lack of one. When Stephanie White said the team was building around Kelsey Mitchell, she wasn't declaring war on Caitlin Clark's future. She was answering a specific question about free agency. It was, by all accounts, a standard response, something a coach says when a key player's contract is coming up. But context doesn't trend. Soundbites do. And the Fever's management, instead of stepping in to clarify, let the fire spread. That silence revealed something much bigger, a blind spot in how the organization understood its own moment in history. The Fever weren't just another basketball team anymore. They were the face of a movement. Caitlin Clark wasn't simply a rookie, she was a cultural phenomenon. Her arrival had given the WNBA something it had been chasing for decades: mainstream traction, sponsorship power, and national relevance. But inside the front office, they treated it like business as usual, like a normal season, like a normal player. And that's where everything started breaking down.
Because when you have generational talent, someone who brings millions of new eyes to your league, you don't just manage it, you elevate it. You adapt your communication, your branding, your strategy, even your fan outreach. But the Fever? They did the opposite. They acted small in a moment that demanded something big. Their communication style stayed old school. Cryptic injury updates, PR statements that sounded rehearsed, and internal loyalty messages that made sense to insiders but alienated the fan base. What they didn't realize was that the WNBA's audience had changed overnight. Fans weren't just watching, they were invested. They weren't following press releases, they were dissecting every syllable in real time. So when management failed to meet that transparency, the audience filled in the blanks. That's where the rumors took root, in the silence. And silence, in the digital age, is the loudest mistake you can make. The truth is, Stephanie White's comments weren't the real problem. The problem was the gap between perception and communication. The Fever said one thing, the internet heard another, and the organization never stepped in to bridge that distance. What made it worse? Their players, the ones being pitted against each other online, were doing everything right. Caitlin Clark showed humility, respect, and an eagerness to learn. Kelsey Mitchell showed leadership, maturity, and loyalty to the franchise that drafted her. Together, they were writing the comeback story of the year. And yet management couldn't translate that reality into messaging that resonated with fans. That's the blind spot. Understanding the power of narrative, because in today's sports world, you're not just managing a roster, you're managing a story. And when you lose control of that story, perception becomes reality. The Fever had the talent to become a dynasty. What they didn't have was the media literacy to match it. Every misstep, every poorly timed quote, every vague update, it all chipped away at the trust they'd built with a fan base that finally believed again. So when people talk about the Indiana Fever problem, they think it's about who the team is built around. It's not. The real problem is how the team communicates what it's building. Because in a league hungry for growth, the Fever's greatest weakness isn't basketball, it's branding. And unless management learns how to protect and project their stars the way the NBA once did for Jordan, Kobe, and LeBron, this same story will keep repeating. Not because of the players, but because of the people upstairs who still think silence is strategy. But as we'll see in the final chapter, this moment isn't just a warning for Indiana. It's a case study for the entire WNBA. A glimpse into what happens when generational opportunity
meets organizational hesitation. When you strip away the noise, the viral clips, the speculation, the outrage, what's left is a story that says more about modern sports than any headline ever could. Because this wasn't really about Caitlin Clark versus Kelsey Mitchell. It wasn't even about Stephanie White's statement. It was about how fast perception can outrun reality, and how easily truth can get lost in translation when communication fails. At its core, the Indiana Fever saga is a mirror reflecting the state of sports media in 2025. We live in a time when narratives aren't built by press conferences or official statements. They're built by tweets, reaction videos, and algorithms designed to reward controversy. A sentence can become a scandal before anyone even finishes it. And in that world, silence isn't professionalism anymore. It's gasoline. That's what Indiana learned the hard way. The organization didn't have a player problem. They had a messaging problem. They underestimated how powerful and fragile momentum can be in an era where fans expect transparency, authenticity, and connection. Caitlin Clark brought that in abundance. So did Kelsey Mitchell. Their chemistry, their humility, their shared drive, it should have been the Fever's biggest selling point. Instead, it got buried under confusion and poor communication. What this all really means is simple. In sports today, storytelling is strategy. You can have elite talent, historic attention, and record-breaking fan engagement. But if you lose control of that story, you lose everything. And the Fever, for all their promise, lost that story. But there's still hope, and it's sitting right there on their roster. Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark. 3 stars who've already proven they can rise above the noise. 3 women who've handled media chaos, internal pressure, and fan expectations with a level of professionalism that puts their organization to shame. The team's chemistry isn't the problem. It's the solution. It's the living proof that unity exists even when the headlines say otherwise. If Indiana can learn from this, if they can match the clarity and honesty their players have already shown, they can still turn this around. Because this story doesn't have to end in controversy. It can end in correction. The Fever have a chance to become the blueprint for how the WNBA should handle generational talent, with transparency, respect, and strategy. But that starts with understanding that communication isn't a PR move, it's a responsibility. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway of all. The truth doesn't shout, it waits. It waits for someone brave enough to speak it clearly even when it's inconvenient. Kelsey Mitchell did that. Caitlin Clark lived it. Now the question is whether the Indiana Fever can finally learn from it. Because in the end, this wasn't the story of a feud. It was the story of how quickly we believe one exists. And maybe, just maybe, that says more about us than it does about them. If you're here for the truth, not the noise, then stay tuned. Because this story isn't over. The Fever's next move will decide whether they become a dynasty or a cautionary tale. And the way they handle it will tell us everything about whether the WNBA is finally ready to rise to the moment it's been waiting for. The truth always matters more than the headlines. Always.